All right, everyone, we will go ahead and get started. Good afternoon and welcome to the Advisory Committee meeting for the Artificially Derived Cannabinoids, or otherwise known as CBN. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules today to attend this afternoon's meeting. My name is Nicole Blasé, and I am the Rules Coordinator for the Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Commission. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. Today's meeting is being recorded. Please ensure that your phone or computer is muted unless you are speaking. Only invited committee members will be a part of today's conversation. Members were selected due to their level of interest or position within the community. With that in mind, we ask that each of you serve as goodwill ambassadors to the discussion so that you may represent your constituency professionally. Please be courteous to other committee members so that we don't have multiple participants speaking at once. You may use the raise hand function in Teams, or if you are calling in, please interject when appropriate and we will call on you in order. Non-committee members will be able to tender comments during the public comment period or at the public hearing. Committee members, please state your first and last name when you make an introduction or a comment. Okay, we will get started. Today is April 4th at approximately 1:30 p.m. Many of you are familiar with the rulemaking process, but for those of you who have not yet had the opportunity, or for those listening in, I will begin by saying a few words about rulemaking and the purpose of advisory committee meetings. The purpose of an advisory committee is to increase the public's involvement in the drafting and development of administrative rules. The Oregon Legislature, through its enactment of the Administrative Procedures Act, ORS Chapter 183, stresses the critical importance of the public's participation in policy development. Advisory committees are an excellent way to solicit input from internal and external stakeholders who are likely to be impacted by the development or amendment of agency policy and rule. Consequently, advisory committee invitees may include licensees, permittees, industry representatives, OLCC staff, members of law enforcement, local government, the public, local community organizations, small businesses, and other interested stakeholders. The purpose of having all of the members on this committee today is to hear from different parts of the industry and public health and safety partners. The Commission strives to hear from all interested parties. Our role today will be to explain the background and context of these rules and the changes that are being proposed in this package. We will provide facilitation to ensure that all committee members can provide input today. During this afternoon's meeting, we will seek your input on the proposed amendments to the Artificially Derived Cannabinoids, or CBN, rules. Today's staff will explain the proposed language changes to the CBN rule by amending Oregon Administrative Rule 845-025-1310. Under Oregon's public meeting law, this meeting is open to the public and members of the public are free to observe our discussion but may not offer comments. The agency will digitally record this advisory committee meeting and will produce and circulate a record of our discussion. However, because this meeting is intended to promote the open exchange of ideas, we will maintain an informal atmosphere and meeting minutes will record only the topics discussed and the main points provided. Approximately 1 week after this meeting, we will post and distribute the meeting's audio. We will now move on to introductions. I will be calling on you to introduce yourself. When introducing yourself, please state your name and the organization you are representing. Again, my name is Nicole Blasé, and I am the Rules Coordinator for the OLCC. We have a few other members of our staff here today. Stephen Crowley.
Hi, Stephen Crowley, Hemp and Cannabinoid Compliance Coordinator at OLCC.
Thank you. Anthony Galtoski.
Hi, Anthony Galtoski, Policy Analyst with the OLCC.
Thank you. David Standiford.
Howdy, David Standiford, Laboratory Compliance Coordinator with the OLCC.
Thanks, David. And I'll move on to the RAC members today. Alay Lindquist.
Hey, yeah, Alay Lindquist. I'm with FloraWorks. We are a CBN manufacturer here in Oregon.
Thank you. Ryan Benelli.
Hi, I'm Ryan Benelli. I'm the COO of Peregrine Precision Systems, which owns Polar Extracts in Clackamas, Oregon.
Thanks, Ryan. Mike Kirkwood.
Hi, I'm Mike. I'm from Angel Industries, ABC Co-op, and we have labs in Clackamas and Medford.
Thank you, Mike. Phil Swindells.
I'm Phil Swindells. I'm the CEO at GVB Biopharma, hemp manufacturer based in Central Oregon.
Thank you, Phil. Oz Hackett.
Yes, this is Oscar Hackett, president of Open Book Extracts, cannabinoid ingredient and finished goods manufacturer in North Carolina.
Thank you. Gabe Parton Lee.
Hi, everyone. Gabe Parton Lee, the general counsel of Wild and Wild CBD out of Clackamas.
Thank you. Christine Smith.
Hi there, Christine Smith, CEO of Green Confections, edible manufacturer here in Oregon.
Thank you, Christine. Lori Wolf. Derek Tanner. Jesse Bonteque.
Hello, Jesse Bonteque, the Executive Director of the Cannabis Industry Alliance of Oregon, formerly ORCA. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jesse. Kendra Freeman.
Whoops, sorry.
Oh, Kendra, I think you're on mute.
Sorry. Kendra Freeman, board member of the OCA and also licensee holder for Yum Clouds and edible and beverage manufacturer.
Great, thank you. Addie Ray.
Hi, this is Adie Ray. I am not here representing any particular organization, although my day job is at Legacy Health, Legacy Research Institute. I'm also the vice chair of the Oregon Cannabis Commission.
Thank you. Erin Lockett.
Hi, I'm Erin Lockett. I'm a food safety program manager at Oregon Department of Agriculture.
Thank you. Sunny Summers.
Good afternoon, Sunny Summers, Oregon Department of Agriculture Senior Policy Advisor.
Thank you, Sunny. And Margaret Flershinger.
Hi, Margaret Flershinger, Policy Analyst with the Oregon Health Authority Medical Marijuana Program.
Great. Thank you all so much for attending this afternoon. We will now move on to our discussion of the proposed rule language for CBN. And with that, Stephen Crowley will now give a summary of the proposed rules and describe the changes to the draft language.
Thanks, Nicole, and thanks to everybody for making the time to participate in this discussion today. We're here to revisit our rules on artificially derived cannabinoids, and in particular, revisit the grace period that the rules give CBN products to comply with the general requirements on artificially derived cannabinoids. Some quick definitions to make sure we're all on the same page. Artificially derived cannabinoids, or ADCs, are cannabinoids that are made by taking a substance extracted from cannabis, hemp or marijuana, as those terms are defined in Oregon law, and transforming that substance into another substance by a chemical reaction. It doesn't include ordinary decarboxylation of cannabinoid acids into cannabinoids, but it does include converting CBD or THC into CBN, delta-8 THC, and so on. OAR 845-025-1310 was originally adopted in December 2021, following the passage of House Bill 3000. It created the framework that's in place now, where OLCC licensees can only manufacture and sell products containing ADCs if the ADC is non-intoxicating and if the ADC meets certain other requirements, including meeting one of the ordinary pathways for introducing a novel ingredient into foods or dietary supplements. Those pathways include new dietary ingredient notification to the FDA, a GRAS, or generally recognized as safe, notice to the FDA, or self-certification of GRAS. The rule gave CBN products an additional 18-month grace period to meet the GRAS or new dietary ingredient requirement. That grace period is set to expire this coming July 1st. And it's OLCC's understanding that at this point, no manufacturer has yet met these requirements, but some expect to in the next 6 to 12 months. The proposed language before you today would extend that grace period for an additional 18 months, subject to certain requirements, including documentation of compliance with existing regulations to ensure public health and safety. Ideally, if this approach is workable, we would like to present rule language to the Commission later this month for adoption as a temporary rule to become effective July 1st to give the market some certainty on how to move forward as the end of the grace period approaches. Then we'd continue through the ordinary process to make these changes permanent before that temporary language expires. Before we dive into the line by line on the language, are there any general thoughts or feedback on this overall concept and approach?
I have a question. I think it might be helpful in some decision making to understand the requirements for grass. What does a grass product look like? How difficult is it for a licensee to achieve that?
Yeah, and is that something that one of the product manufacturers who's working on meeting those requirements would like to speak to?
This is
Yes.
Mike. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Kendra Freeman, Yum Clouds. Yes, I would like to understand that.
Yeah, so related to that, this is Mike from Angel Industries. Understanding is that, in the current state of the regulatory framework, that options B and C that were presented are not really options in the marketplace in terms of the FDA's position on both of those issues that has been shown with CBD and other things. And so option A, what is called the self-affirmed, is a relatively broad investment between probably $50,000 to $250,000 to bring in a chemist and toxologist and other team members to do that. It does require that the core ingredient then be used in that way and produced in that way going forward. And so we have a number of questions and suggestions related to that in terms of how, for example, the OLCC and or ODA or OHA, could potentially, respond to those, respond to, for example, a GRAS determination that was made locally or self-affirmed in such a way that if other manufacturers were using that same ingredient and then that was manufactured the same way, that they could potentially write and use the other GRAS that somebody achieved. And so there's a number of questions and issues for that. I think that we understand at least, and that our team's been working on. But it's not something that's relatively, simple to do, without having that team in place that actually makes that determination for you.
And yes, go ahead, LA.
Hey, yeah, I just would elaborate a little bit. So, yeah, the two other options outside of self-affirmation of GRAS are in question. We don't yet know today if the rules around CBD would apply to CBN as well, which is that CBD is considered a drug in the FDA's eyes. Because CBN is made from CBD, the argument would be that a supplement can't be made from a drug and therefore GRAS qualification is not valid. The process for GRAS is a handful of toxicology and in some cases, some neurobehavioral studies. The total cost of these studies themselves is roughly $750,000. This is because there is no existing data to support toxicology yet. And so you're basically looked at as a brand new chemical entity. And there's fundamentally some basic standards there. Really, it's going to depend on your third party group that would be signing off on this. But the dossier itself would need to be pretty robust with toxicology information to qualify. Whether it's valid in the eyes, again, of the FDA is to be determined.
Thanks. And just a couple of things I'd add to that. I mean, in terms of the options going through the FDA, at this point, what the FDA has said publicly is their position on CBD and THC is based on the status of those two particular substances as either approved drugs or substances that were under investigation as new drugs at the time that's relevant for FDA timelines on this. I haven't seen any indication that the FDA would extend those considerations to other cannabinoids, which are not approved drugs or potentially not under serious investigation as new drugs at this time. But I guess that is still to be determined, since it doesn't appear that anyone has submitted a new dietary ingredient notice. And then on the grass, to Mike's point, my understanding is that there's the toxicology element, and toxicological investigations of CBN would be generalizable, I would imagine, to any CBN manufacturer. But then there's also the elements of the manufacturing process, and that being a part of the GRAS dossier, how it's made and making sure of what else might be being made in that process, what potential byproducts or contaminants would be an issue. And those, I think, would be an issue that would vary from manufacturer to manufacturer. Yeah, go ahead, Ale.
Yeah, I just thought I'd add a tiny bit more clarity around the complicated regulatory environment. So basically, there's an FDA rule that a drug cannot be a supplement if it has been filed as a new investigative new drug. So upon wanting to do research on a cannabinoid, in this case, for a treatment of a disease, would be triggering this. We don't currently know if there are any filings in the DART system. We're just about to make another check. A year and a half ago, there were not. But that still doesn't necessarily change this issue around CBD, that because CBD, even though it had a history of consumption prior to 2018, it was illegal consumption. And so because Epidiolex was filed as a drug, CBD effectively became a drug and is no longer valid or capable of being a supplement in the eyes of the FDA. And that rule is the one they just gave clarity on earlier this year, that they currently do not intend to make a change to that to allow CBD to be a supplement, which is obviously in contradiction to both state rules right now and consumer behavior and how these things are being sold in the market. So I'll step off. Yep.
Thanks for that. And yeah, just to clarify, so at this point, we're not talking about or considering changing the final requirements that products or the artificially derived cannabinoids are going to need to land on. The purpose of the discussion today is in terms of extending that grace period for CBN and what guardrails might need to be in place for that extension period. So I guess circling back to that, any thoughts and feedback on that general approach of extend the deadline, add some reasonable guardrails that hopefully are not too heavy of a lift and should, I think, generally be within the realm of what manufacturers are already doing, so that we can kind of bridge that gap to a point where manufacturers can meet the evidence level to make that GRAS determination.
Hey, Steve, this is Mike again. I just had a quick question about that, if you don't mind. The small note that we made on that, that bullet point 3 is, if we were able to make it to 2030 rather than 2025, that could make it so that people could actually plan correctly inside of our marketplace, which is, somewhat being assaulted, as it were, in this area, but not having clarity. And then if it was, for example, a $250,000 or $750,000 investment, people could actually at least know that they have some business in Oregon for a while to do that. If there's later other issues related to, we have to now shut this down or we have to change it for other external purposes, that always will be considered by the commission, I'm sure. But if you did that, it would allow us to have actual breathing room. And then if other big investments need to be placed to, have Oregon, helps get this GRAS determination and prove that at least one of these other cannabinoids is valuable to humanity, then we've solved something for real here. And so that's kind of the nature of our, response. And I know it's asking for a lot, but then it means that we're not really back in this room again, immediately, basically, because these three options aren't really going to happen tomorrow. They're not going to happen in this period of time, even if people put all their energy into it. Potentially they will for a few folks, but that's just my feedback.
Yeah, go ahead, Gabe.
Thanks, Gabe Partonley from Wild. I think the only feedback that I'd have and I'd love to see is that if we do set on some of those guardrails, that the guardrails be extended to any artificial, non-impairing, non-intoxicating, artificially derived cannabinoid. So beyond just CBN, if we can find those guardrails, then we can have a more acceptably regulated industry that's beyond picking and choosing one cannabinoid at a time, so that we can look towards a larger scope of things and address the whole industry rather than just one cannabinoid piece by piece.
Go ahead, Kendra.
Hi, I was wondering, in part of the redraft of this, it says that a company needs to take substantial steps into going after this. And so as a small business owner, and for the other small business owners in the industry, like, what would those substantial steps be? And is that going to be catastrophic financially?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that wouldn't really apply to the finished product manufacturers who are purchasing CBN to use in a finished product. That would be on the manufacturer of the CBN itself. That business has started working towards the toxicological studies or the characterization of what's coming out of their manufacturing method, those pieces that are going to be necessary elements of the GRAS or new dietary ingredient determination of safety. So the costs of introducing a novel ingredient into a food or supplement are what they are, but that the way that this is written, that would apply to the manufacturer of the artificially derived cannabinoid itself, not a finished product manufacturer who's purchasing that for use in a product.
From my point of view, that's kind of a little bit contradictory to kind of what normal GRAS would be for, isn't it? Where the finished product, like if somebody's submitting the GRAS recommendation, don't they actually want you to say the final form factor and have that actually be part of the tests? I'm not that I know that there's some different approaches, but
it's an ingredient classification.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's basically any food additive that comes to market has to go through one of these three categories, or any additive to any ingestible, whether it's a drug, supplement, or food, has to go through these categories. The GRAS certification and self-certification, which is used in like 90% of food additives at this point, is for everybody. So if sugar were changed to a slightly less sweet version of itself, put into, it would have to go through this self-certification in order to be added to your cereal before it's put to market. And so it'd have to go through these same sort of toxicology reports that we're going through, the same sort of toxicology tests. There's probably some exemption for the sugar industry because they're bigger than us. But generally, these are the buckets that we have to go through for any sort of food additive. And so while this is largely, it's a huge investment for us as an industry. And so we really appreciate the opportunity to discuss a longer time period to get in. This is standardization with what the federal food additives and sort of ingestible additives standards look like.
Yeah, go ahead, Kendra.
One last question on just the redrafting of this. Would it be possible to let an organization where it's like we all collaborate and put money towards this, or possibly get state funding to do this? So like, could the OCA take this on and get state funding to do the grass? Is that something where that would be good for our manufacturers? Because I really think, it's like we have an opportunity here in Oregon to be a leading manufacturer of CBN, just due to the amount of hemp. And so I just wonder if that's something that the rules could state that a group could get together, not just one entity.
I mean, the grass determination, I think, would have to come from the particular manufacturer. If there are groups within the industry that want to come together and collaborate to collect the data that'll be applicable to all of them, I think we'd leave that up to industry.
Yeah, there is an Oregon Gap Fund that's meant for this type of research, chemical research. I think the fund is about 300 million. They've currently denied us because we're a hemp company, just for context.
We've been exploring some options related to that, in terms of at least having it so that if there was a similar process that was used in other manufacturers, that the same group, that research group, could be available to, supply and or verify other samples. And that might be an option, to allow several kind of licensee / kind of validation approaches to occur. Since there's IP and all this other stuff involved, and the expense is so large, for small company, we're trying to figure out some viable options there. And it seems like the research group that we've assembled would be interested in figuring out something like that. But their condition would be that the OLCC or the commission would have to respond to the self-affirmed grass and say that they have no objections, so that there's actually an affirmation that would come from the state, so that then we could say, okay, see, they said okay, not just filed away in a document or whatever. And so we would think that that would be an appropriate step for the self-affirmation, and it would also put Oregon, as Kendra was pointing out, further in a leadership position. It may require some funding to have a staff member be able to, do that work, but it could be a big win from, kind of closing the loop and allowing potentially one or two processes to kind of become the standard, that's actually determined in the grass is used in a lot of the products in Oregon.
Thanks, Mike. That's an interesting thought. It does kind of get us away from the way this is framed now, is just using the existing pathways. You're submitting to FDA, self affirmation of grass, or submitting the new dietary ingredient notification to FDA, to have OLCC or an Oregon agency take on that role of being the FDA in evaluating and making a no objections response. I think might be getting a little beyond the scope and sort of creating an extra pathway outside of the existing established one. So I think that would need some more thought. Yeah, LA.
For sure. It would be somewhat of a risk, but it would also potentially be, a boost for manufacturing, because there might be more business, like maybe THCV or something else might be coming, right down the path. And then, Oregon's kind of printing, if you will, the standards for cannabinoids within its state, within Oregon. If people use them for other purposes, our companies, do them in other states, and other manufacturing processes exist. It may end up being one of these companies in Oregon that kind of, bounces around other places and helps, people do this. The customers have spoken so clearly on CBN. We don't understand it even. It's crazy. It's going to eventually be, grow. It's going to grow.
Would it be addressable in this language that the rules around the open market for hemp products in Oregon, excluding CBN, that if you had FDA standards like GRAS, NDI, that would supersede that, and that market would then reopen back up for meeting those standards? Or would those rules have to, they should be removed once the federal level is met?
Yeah, at this point, the kind of the scope and the way that OLCC's authority is written on this, there isn't really the ability to regulate at that level of granularity where we could put conditions on it like that. That being said, I know there is a bill in the Oregon Senate that is looking at addressing that exact issue. So I guess potentially more to come on that.
All right.
We really like the idea, that's probably very unpopular with this audience, but we like the idea that all of this is taking place in processor labs with endorsements rather than ODA labs. Nothing against ODA hemp handler licenses, but they really have no scrutiny or inventory or required cameras. And of course they could be GMP, which is awesome. We're hugely supportive, and really many of them are run probably way better than the OLCC licenses because they want to scale. But it would be more appropriate if this state was taking action on this move to potentially confine that, especially with the rule allowing those labs to export things out that came from hemp sources. And so that really solves the loophole that this would happen, under camera in an endorsed license rather than, wherever. I mean, that's the current rule with the ODA license. There's no oversight, that really exists.
Yeah, I think everyone agrees cannabinoids are over-regulated as a market as it is, whether it's intoxicating or not intoxicating, and further creating those, I don't think FloraWorks would be in support of that.
Yeah, and I mean, just for the sake of this conversation, we're looking at treating hemp as hemp and marijuana as marijuana as those are defined under state law. I think we're probably ready to dive into the line by line and get feedback on the specifics of what this is proposing. So I'm sharing the document here that I think you all have in front of you. No changes on the first page. It's a short document, just the one rule. At the top of the second page, the first change would be pushing out that grace period from July 1st of this year to January 2nd of 2025. I know Mike suggested 2030. I think this is something that if we need to continue revisiting, we're comfortable with. I don't know that we would want to push it out too far right now, partly just because of the potential for so many things to change as the cannabis landscape continues to evolve. Thoughts on that January 2025 date? 80. Oh, you're on mute.
I think it would make sense to take an evidence-based approach rather than an arbitrary one here. What is the timeline for achieving, a self-certification of GRAS? And maybe let's pad that a little bit to give our licensees some time to do that. But arbitrarily setting it at that time doesn't seem logical to me.
Sure, and that's something we've talked to some of the manufacturers about, and kind of what we're hearing is there may be some that could potentially meet this within a few months, so not long after the current end of the grace period. Some estimates a little bit further out, closer to a year. I know we received a request from an industry group to push it out an additional 12 months. And so we did kind of pad that with an extra 6 months built in, just because these things can sometimes take longer than we hope at the outset.
And I assume that those folks that can get it done in the least amount of time are the most well provisioned, for lack of a better word, and that our smaller businesses with fewer resources may need more time.
I think we have most of the manufacturers here in the discussion. Any of the manufacturers want to speak to that?
Yeah, it's about a 14-month process. For those of us that were involved in the conversation a year ago, I assume everyone has started this process in some form. Obviously, if you don't have capital, it's a hurdle that would be very difficult to achieve. And that's a different business concern. Hard to address that here. These things should be made safely. And these are standards that do exist at the Fed level already, that other things people consume. So, there's no other ingredient you could make without following these rules.
And Kendra, I see you've been waiting. Go ahead.
Well, I guess that was my question is, do we need more than, does like each manufacturer need this GRAS research? Because isn't the information like for everyone once somebody gets it?
I mean, the toxicology on the molecule itself is one thing, and that I think would kind of generally apply. But the other part of it is the manufacturing process and byproducts and purity standards, identity standards, and those sorts of things. I think will vary from manufacturer to manufacturer, for their particular manufacturing process.
Yeah,
I was just saying, going to say, so everybody would technically currently need to either commit to buying somebody who's going to achieve it or not do it. Or do the GRAS determination themselves and fund that.
Yeah, there's potential that there will be piggybacking on the toxicology work. One of the requirements for GRAS, self-affirmation of GRAS to be valid is that the research itself is all published in a scientific journal, so it's referenceable. What that process may look like there is referencing that toxicology, but validating that your compound is pure and validating the process. I don't know exactly what that might look like yet to try to do that, but it is potentially possible.
Yeah, Dr. Ray.
So the peer review process, it can be quite slow depending on where an author submits a particular manuscript. Some journals have great turnaround and you can, sort of slide through within 60 days of submission, and others, require revisions to the manuscript, additional experiments, and the process from the original submission to the final acceptance and publication in PubMed, that can often be a year and a half in itself. And there's kind of no way to predict what the reviewers are going to ask when a manuscript is submitted. So I think that might be one thing that we take into account here. Number one, how many industry-funded manuscripts are in progress at the moment, toxicology, who is already paying a scientist to do these preclinical studies? How far along is that work, and how far away is that from publication? Because if we don't yet have that published research, then that's going to add some time to the timeline.
Yeah, I think those are fantastic questions, and if any of the manufacturers here would like to speak to where they're at in the process and their expected timeline, or just even a estimate of likelihood that you'll be able to meet these requirements, within before January 2025, I think that would be really helpful for the discussion right now.
Yeah, this is Oscar Hackett with Open Book. We are through. We just got last week, or actually earlier this week, our final report on the phase 2 90-day tox studies for CBN, and our next step is to move into the self-GRAS publication peer review phase. So, we've made good progress and would be in a position to hit that deadline.
So can I clarify that when you say you've gotten your final report, you have all of the evidence that has been collected, but so far that evidence has not yet been synthesized into a manuscript or submitted to a peer review journal?
That's exactly right. That's the next step.
Thank you.
Other manufacturers, Ryan, where would Polar Extracts land on this timeline?
Thank you for asking. We're confident in being able to achieve this timeline, and we do operate in more than one region throughout the country. But yes, we'd be able to meet this timeline.
Yeah, go ahead, Kendra.
Sorry, I know this is a lot, but I guess I just keep coming back to the fact that, like, if we're the only state that requires this and people do it outside of here, isn't that kind of siloing manufacturers not to produce here? And I just feel like I don't know, I feel like maybe opening it up for a longer timeline, even though some people are going to hit that, would give room for people that might not have that capacity to finish that.
I mean, I think it's a balancing act. Right now we're talking about these are products that are just available within Oregon's regulated adult use market, and public health and safety is a major consideration. So if a business is not able to meet the requirements these requirements already apply to these things going into foods or supplements. It's just a matter of whether businesses actually comply with that requirement, and that's something that we can't control what other states do or allow, but within the regulated market, I think that's something to be mindful of, the role of rules and regulations in terms of consumer safety and public health and safety. Yeah, Dr. Ray.
What would be the harm or the downsides of extending the timeline to 2026, just an additional year? It seems like a reasonable amount of time, but I'm curious what the unintended consequences of 2025 versus 2026 would be. Would that cause more safety issues, or again, kind of trying to think about what is the right sort of evidence-based timeline here for if we have a manufacturer who wasn't a part of these conversations a year ago and is just stepping into the game now. Does that, would they be in a position to be able to meet these qualifications by, 2025? I'd love some more information about that.
Yeah, I think that's something we'll go ahead.
David Stanford, OLCC. The trick is we don't know with any of this. Until the studies are done, we don't know what the harm is. The harm could be real, actual, and been going on for a long time. And at which point, the sooner we require this information, the sooner we could make a public health and safety decision on whether it should be allowed or not allowed. And so that's why I think it's important to set something not so far out that people could delay it, and by setting something that's going to require a quicker pace and active focus to work on to achieve, or else you can't play the game, you can't compete in that market. This incentivizes prioritizing that model of let's get the toxicology reports, let's make a good, educated, and efficient decision on it. And so that was the weighing, but we're absolutely open to hearing from everyone. But that was the thought process of it's really impossible to make a harm, a threat of harm assessment until we have these studies. And the sooner we get the studies, we can make that assessment.
It would be interesting if that was the position that if the OLCC would consider, like if one of the, let's say, initial folks that were doing it, that their study came back clean, that there was a way for all these other licensees to take advantage of that. I mean, it is a relatively large expense that we're talking about, and also expertise, in terms of that core ingredient. And so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the market, if that's the approach, because right now then it essentially becomes a very clear and efficient land grab, I guess.
David Stanford, OLCC. Yeah, going back to what we said earlier, because it is so specific, there is that piece to the manufacturing practice that is going to be bespoke to each manufacturer. What solvents are being used, the process. One person could be making it in one way where it's safe, and another person may have a manufacturing process where it can't, it's not going to pass that bar. And so I don't think we could generalize it. And so that's why we're looking at it in the model that the feds use.
Yeah, this is Oscar Oz Hackett with Open Book again. I understand that the manufacturing process, and I'm sort of speaking against my own self-interest here, but I know with the FDA, the manufacturing process is important. But in terms of the OLCC's determination about like the general safety of CBN, I think if you have a purified product that removes any solvents or reagents that were used in the manufacturing process, and you have a COA to show that, the manufacturer, I think you can get a generally good sense in terms of the safety profile of a pure CBN ingredient that's fully characterized, anything over 0.1% and 99% pure, regardless of the manufacturing process. So I do think looking at some of the early safety data that could be made available for members of this committee could help inform that timeline.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you hit on the critical point, though, of characterizing anything above a certain threshold in terms of other byproducts from the reaction or other impurities that are left. I mean, you can test to make sure that the solvents and reagents aren't there. But if you don't know everything that's coming out of the reaction, that's a significant gap that, I think this approach is kind of geared at mitigating.
Yeah.
David Stanford, OLCC. I also don't, it's unclear, but I'm not sure the OLCC has the authority to establish a purity standard compliance test. And so we did consider that, but public health testing is nested in Oregon Health Authority for cannabis. And so establishing a separate coded test just for this product, I don't believe we have the authority to it, or at least that was one of our concerns.
All right, and then to kind of move on to the particular bridging guardrails that we're looking at here for the next 18 months or whatever the timeline turns out to be. So the first one is that the manufacturer has taken substantial steps towards meeting the requirements. So that kind of gets to the point that David was making about a manufacturer at least starting to initiate the studies to meet these requirements, so that we aren't in a period of not knowing for an unnecessary amount of time. Yeah, go ahead, Gabe.
Thanks. And I wanted to jump backwards. I, was waiting for us to get done with the timeline piece because I definitely liked where that conversation was going to make sure that more people can get into the market so that, as was identified previously, it's not a one processor monopoly that ends up springing up for this next 18 months. But before jumping in, on that train of thought, I want to point out, what is it? What is it? Sub C here was manufactured by a processor and ODA hemp handler. I think there's because we're setting these guardrails and because, we're aiming at federal standardization, we should also make sure that we're looking at the, full faith and credit for every other state's food processing or food manufacturing or hemp handling allowances to make sure that other out of staters can also, supply the market. This is the same way that we have hemp coming in from out of state, tested to our standards and put into, either marijuana products or into hemp products and sold in the Oregon markets here. And I think that same sort of allowance should be allowed for these artificially derived cannabinoids. And because because this is also part of section 1, going to reiterate that we'd love to see this beyond just CBN into any artificially derived cannabinoid. So rather than canceling out or crossing out artificially derived cannabinoid, cross out CBN and just put any artificially derived cannabinoid that meets these benchmark standards is produced in allowance with these new guidelines and is it meets these standards under this next little bit until we get up to speed and get through those grass periods, allow for those non-intoxicating, non-impairing hemp cannabinoids to be allowed in the OLCC market as well.
Yeah. So on that point, I think there's some factors in why this grace period was just exclusive to CBN to begin with. Part of it being the share of the market that it's in, but the other and I think more significant part being how readily it seems to be able to be purified to a pretty high degree, and some of that comes down to the physical properties of that particular molecule, where it's easily crystallized, makes it much more straightforward for manufacturers to get it to a higher degree of purity, where there's at least less concern about byproducts. Although, until we have data, we really don't know. So that's why we'd like to make sure we're still on a reasonable time frame for getting that information. But on the states, manufacturers and other states issue, I'm glad you brought that up. That's something that we've also been thinking about. There's some language in Senate Bill 353 around that. And so, yeah, I'd like to hear from the rest of the group what the consensus would be around removing the was manufactured by an OLCC processor or ODA hemp handler, and instead going with was manufactured in a food establishment licensed by ODA, or to kind of borrow the language from the Senate bill, or in a facility in another state that meets substantially similar requirements, from that state's food licensing body.
And this is, it gets a little confusing sometimes, what the authority allows us to do at these things, of whether it's allowing us to sell into the OLCC market or if it's allowing us to, sell in the outside market. Our business participates in both of those, but that, is one of my first questions, of course. We're of course suggesting the other direction, which is that only an OLCC licensed processor can do the activity. And the reasons for that is that there actually is the authority that Oregon has in this area on the inside market. The retail stores, the consumers that want these products. And so so it's really a tough one from our point of view. From a business point of view, we love the idea. We think that Gabe's making a spot on observation, and that companies like Open Book and others that are running in multiple states or have a major presence makes it so it's not an unreasonable, period in the short term. But what was the rule? What was the OLCC granted in terms of the authority, and what was the will of the, individuals who are granting that rule? And it was really around, selling marijuana items inside of the recreational market. And so those are the only labs that have inventory control. And so it's really hard, from having those licenses have such draconian rules, if you would argue, compared to the other states, rules, it's quite difficult to continue to pay those licensing fees in Oregon, right? Because you're making us do all of it, and we're dealing with THC and CBD, and so it's really kind of a mixed issue from my point of view. And I would support it, but I would definitely be hating my $5,000 fee.
Yeah, and again, I was from Open Book. We're happy. We understand that perspective entirely, and would be happy to pay a fee, a licensing fee, to register with or be inspected by, or I shared this with Steve on another call, that we understand that there are resources dedicated by OLCC to making sure that the supply chain is sound, and we're happy to play our part in that fee structure.
Yeah, go ahead, Sunny.
Okay. So the language in that bill is problematic, Stephen, from our food safety perspective, and I'll let Aaron jump in if I get any of this wrong. But I think if you require them to meet ODA's food safety requirements, you are already requiring them to be licensed by the food safety program in their whatever state they're coming from. So that would be my preferred form of doing that, is to just say they have to meet the food safety standards. That means that if you are getting a quote unquote ingredient from another state, that it has to come from an approved source, which already means that they have to come from a licensed facility in another state. So I would prefer to stay away from the language that's in Senate Bill 353, because not only is substantially similar problematic language from a rulemaking standpoint, it would have to be like meets or exceeds, but it creates a lot of rulemaking and a lot of opportunity for conversation. We've had to do it for egg laying or egg standards to meet a national standard. And so I think just a more streamlined way is to just, it has to meet food safety requirements. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, that's
really helpful. And there are also federal GMP standards for food and nutraceuticals. So a out-of-state processor could also be held to the requirement of holding a CGMP certification for CFR parts 111 and or 117, which is an approach that Colorado is currently considering.
And I think that's a perfect segue into the next piece of the kind of bridging guardrails, is that the manufacturer needs to have conducted a hazard analysis as described in 21 CFR 117 130, and that's the food safety GMP requirement, and then and provide the commission with a copy of that hazard analysis. And then if any preventative controls are identified that are needed to minimize or prevent hazards from that hazard analysis, provide to the commission a copy of the preventative controls as well. Those are both elements of existing GMP requirements. But I wanted to hear specifically from the CBN manufacturers whether that hazard analysis and preventative controls information is something that you all already have in hand and would be able to provide if the rule went into effect this way.
Short answer from Open Book is yes.
Yeah, same for Angel.
That would be,
LA
yes.
or, okay.
That'd be yes.
And
from
then
program. Yeah.
Phil or LA?
We also did have a little bit of feedback on that, if other entities were going to, license or use a combined, participate in their process underneath, for example, the one that we're doing, that, that these components also could be, that would be part of the general manufacturing process. And so these would be normal things that would be, offered or, part of some sort of joint effort potentially.
I mean, I guess since we're on the subject, are there any other elements that are already required for foods or supplements under federal law that would be useful to put in here at this point, like the requiring reporting of serious adverse events, like what the FDCA requires for supplements?
From my point of view, it requires the same thing that we were asking for, which is a response from the OLCC, on the process. And so, if you're going to take the responsibility to take this other information and take action on it, it seems like a liability if you're not even signing off on the process. And so we were of the opinion that the OLCC should be funded with a bit of money to increase staff around this area for this cannabinoid and others, and be able to, actually administer these type of things. But, from our point of view, not being able to, affirm the letter that they're asking for the grass, which is, not going to really viable on the federal level in the short term, it seems. But then also asking for adverse events and other stuff from our documentation would be, just challenging from my point of view. I mean, we would do it for sure, but, just asking why not also step up and say, yes, we agreed that we have no comments on your process. It's not, it's not asking the world for what we're trying to accomplish.
Any other thoughts on the GMP hazard analysis preventive controls? And actually, yes, thanks, Gabe. I'll take a look at that and make sure we've got it all lined out correctly. The internal references get tricky as things get changed during drafting. Let's see, so for 3BC versus 3BD, yes. Yes, that's correct. And before we move on, any other thoughts on the hazard analysis preventative controls submissions as a stopgap during the extended grace period? All right, that's most of the meat of this concept. The rest of it is that, this is an approval model. Manufacturers who can meet these requirements would get written approval from OLCC. OLCC would make available a public list of any manufacturer who's met these requirements, so that finished product manufacturers have that information available when they're making the decision on who to purchase the ingredients from. And if a manufacturer no longer meets the requirements, that approval would be revocable, subject to hearings. The other kind of two pieces in here are allowing OLCC to consult with Department of Agriculture for the purposes of reviewing the information in this request. You know, the food safety, GMP, all of that is much more within their world than our world. So just kind of a pairing of minds and resources there. And then the last piece here is if any of the information submitted falls within the definition of a trade secret in ORS 192501, then the manufacturer could mark those documents confidential or trade secret so that OLCC can take that information into account, for example, when we get records requests.
Stephen, just curious, related to how on the administrative side, since this the date of July 1st is coming up first, I'm assuming these steps would be done prior to then. And then if this is a new collaboration between the departments in terms of collecting this information and verifying it, do you expect it would take a week or two for each manufacturer to get done? Like would there be a time that it would have to be complete for not to have a blank in the market, in July 1st?
Right. I mean, we've talked about this in broad strokes with ODA food safety. We haven't nailed down timelines on what that would look like, but I mean, we do have a few months until July 1st, and so I feel reasonably confident. And the consulting with ODA is an option, but not a necessity. I think OLCC would be confident of being able to process things in a timely manner to make sure that the transition is smooth. Yeah, go ahead, Gabe.
Yeah, I really appreciate you highlighting that one, Mike, and definitely want to, reiterate that. And if there's any messaging that you can do to licensees, retailers through, through bulletins, well in advance that this is coming, in rule, it's helpful. I mean, order cycles are, 30 to 90 days in advance, and especially retailers want to make sure that they don't have anything left on their shelves if doomsday is coming. So this whole effort would be really supported by making sure that everybody understands that this is going on.
Thanks, Gabe. Yeah, Jesse. You're on mute, Jesse.
There you go. Sorry. Thank you for taking the time to meet with us and listen. And I know a lot of people on here have been talking to you in one way or another, trying to make progress on this. And this does seem like a significant improvement over the status quo. Although in general, we are supportive as flexible as possible regulations for businesses to make as many to be as innovative as possible. But that being said, just so we're all like 100% clear, could you just quickly describe if you guys pass this rules, kind of what the new landscape will look like for the people who are engaged in this process and how you imagine that unfolding?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be very similar to the current status quo for finished product manufacturers within our market. Anybody making these products right now already has the label approval that discloses the artificially derived cannabinoid. The only difference would be that starting July 1st, they need to be getting the CBN from a manufacturer who has requested from OLCC this approval letter and demonstrated that they have started taking steps towards meeting the GRAS or NDI requirement and submitted the hazard analysis and any preventative control information under their GMP. Yeah, Christine.
Yeah, so I just, again, I think clarity, as we've kind of talked about, is how this rolls out. One of the things that would be really important for us to understand as we talk about with getting CBN that is coming from one of these processors starting July 1st, is that a day that we start production, right, on our side with that, and then that rolls out, because the products that we make in June are going to hit markets July, August, and therefore. So, and for us, if there's any packaging changes and if there's any things that affect our processes with the amount that we're producing, with how we're, doing our cycles, I mean, we're looking quarters ahead, not just months or weeks. And that's going to be extremely confusing for these retailers too. So if it's a July 1st date, that's fine. And the onus is on us to be able to have that documentation. So we're not asking retailers to verify anything. That's fine. And we're happy to provide that going forward. But any clarity on that, I think would be really useful, so that we're not trying to explain that to retailers, because they don't want to hear that from us. They want it from you.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a good note. And yeah, we'll definitely need to do robust communication around this. But yeah, the goal is to be as minimally disruptive as we can in extending this. I don't anticipate any packaging labeling changes for products that are already on the market.
Thank you.
In our observation, this product, the CBN products by both Wild and Gron and others in the market, are the most close thing to repeatable that we have ever seen from a retail point of view. Meaning that people do, spend their $19.80 or whatever it is to come in every single week on the same day. They need it for their sleep. And so, by letting CBN as a natural output of cannabis, be in the market, a major thing is being solved for a lot of consumers. They're choosing it for themselves, from their voice, asking people to manufacture these products. So I am hoping that it definitely is smooth for everyone to, continue. If there's anything that we can do to contribute, we're down.
Thanks, Mike. Any other closing thoughts? I think we've bottomed out on the language there. If not, we can give you all 15 minutes of your time back.
Really quick, Stephen, I just wanted to, we did circulate the fiscal impact statement questionnaire. You can email that back to me, but does anybody very quickly have any feedback on the possible fiscal impacts of these changes that anybody would like to share?
Well, I just really do believe that the OLCC should respond to a GRAS determination to help the marketplace in general, because it very likely won't get through FDA, and so we'll end up in the same spot over and over again. And so if Oregon did do that, it would be really useful to the industry. It would require staff to do that. We would suggest that be added. I know that that's asking for a lot, but it's also, giving a lot. I have no way to quantify that, but, that's our very small suggestion. And then we would still like to see the date extended, another year at least, but 2 years at least, because this is a very, you are asking companies to take on an inordinate amount of effort if they're going to be in this space, and appropriately, because that's what the world is all about. But, it is, inside of a market that already exists. It's already sanctioned, that already is operating, that people already rely on from local vendors.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Anybody else? Okay, if anyone after this meeting decides that they have additional feedback on that, please complete the statement questionnaire and return it to us no later than Friday, April 14th by emailing olcc.rulemaking@oregon.gov. Looks like Jesse has some additional feedback.
Just this is Jesse from the CIO, and just for the record, I hope that the licensees who are affected by this will submit the financial reporting, but I just want to make sure it has been noted that for many of the processors I have talked to about this issue, CBN is a immensely important and significant profit driver for them and revenue generator for them. And anything that, and every piece of progress you can make on the status quo will be financially beneficial to them. I know of some people who shut down a whole line of products because this rule was implemented. And there are few, and we are in a stress marketplace. So opening up this situation and allowing people to meet customer demands that are quite massive, I'm a nightly CBN user, would be immensely beneficial to everybody I've talked to who is in the processing space and work with CBN. That was it.
All right. Thanks, Jesse. Any last comments, questions? Kendra?
Yeah, kind of piggybacking on what Jesse said is that just to think about maybe, yes, there are larger companies that can afford to do this, but equitably speaking, anybody new that wants to come to Oregon and do this, it does not leave much room. And so I think just equitably speaking, like, I just feel like this is a huge impact, and it doesn't, even if I'm a product maker, it affects us as well. Only having 2 sources to get this from, or 3 sources. So I think it's just, if there's any way, and also like what Gabe said, like, are we going to have to do this for every single cannabinoid? Like just in the future. So I just think there are a lot of fiscal issues and impacts here that are bigger than just, the grass. And so if we got this saying that it was publicly safe and this is the way that you process it, could that be a storybook where it's like, okay, well, that's how we can process it because we know it's safe. So could we put that in there?
Great. Thank you, Kendra. Anybody else? Last call. Okay, on behalf of the OLCC, I want to thank our RAC members today for providing their expertise on these issues. A notice of public hearing will be issued in the coming months, which will allow for interested parties to provide testimony or submit written comments. And as always, you can always contact myself or any of the other OLCC staff with questions. And I hope everybody has a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thanks, everyone.